On today's episode of the Saturday Strategy Spotlight, we're taking a little bit of a detour out of the land of things like Fire Emblem and into the land of roguelites. But don't worry, before you click away, there's a lot of strategy to be had with this one. So let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and if you enjoy what I do, my coverage of strategy games, big and small, roguelite, turn-based, real-time, etc., news, guides, all that type of good stuff, a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated, especially since this is only the second episode of the Saturday Strategy Spotlight, and the first one went over quite well, so thank you for that. What is the topic of today's video? It is Loop Hero. And this is one that was played back in the early days of the channel comparatively to where we are now. I adore Loop Hero. If you're not familiar with it, you should absolutely go familiarize yourself with it right now. I will have a link to its Steam page in the description, and it is on a number of other platforms as well, including mobile now, which I have to check out, but I've heard it's pretty good there. Loop Hero, if you were not aware, is a little indie game wherein you are rebuilding the world, literally, out of the void. Like, not space, like Eldritch Void, consumed by darkness type of stuff. You are playing both the hero and the dungeon master, kind of playing against yourself. What does that mean? Well, as you go into a loop for the first time, all you're going to be able to see is a road and some slimes on it, and your little guy prancing around. As you make your way around and defeat enemies, you'll get gear that you can use to upgrade your stats in all sorts of different ways. We'll talk about the character progression a little later in the video. But more importantly, for the base functioning of the game, the base gameplay loop, if you will, is cards. This is, in a way, a deck builder, but not like your Slay the Spires or your Monster Trains or anything like that. You'll find terrain cards when you defeat enemies that will allow you to actually put parts of the world onto the map. You are essentially building the dungeon as you play. You'll find things like meadows and mountains and forests to rebuild the landscape, and that's going to give you different beneficial effects. Forests give you attack speed, mountains give you HP, that kind of thing. You'll also find tiles that can only be placed on the road itself, and these are typically going to be your enemy spawning tiles. For example, you can put down cemeteries, and in that square for the rest of the game, skeletons will spawn there periodically that you will then fight. They have their own, of course, characteristics, strengths, weaknesses, and different types of gear and cards that they can give you. There are a ton of different cards in the game, far more than we can go over here, and as its nature as a roguelite, you will unlock more and more as you do different things progressing through the game. Things will start off basic, again, skeletons, goblins, slimes, maybe some thieves trying to ransack towns that you put down. But then you can start to get into some pretty crazy stuff, like temporal watchers who fade in and out of time, and blood hulks that come lumbering out of carnivorous forests that consume the corpses of enemies you kill there to make the hulks. Very fun stuff like that gets more and more weird as you progress through the game. As you continue your loops, enemies will get stronger, you will heal over time when days pass, and the manipulation of time passing is actually a big mechanic. There are ways to make it faster, there are ways to make it slower, and there's different benefits to doing so. Every time a day passes, you'll get some HP back. Every time a day passes, enemies will also spawn. Sometimes you want as many enemies as possible so that you can slay out early on when they're easier to beat and get a bunch of XP. Sometimes you're going to want to make sure that things move as slowly as possible so there's as few enemies as possible to get in your way while you're maybe on your way to a boss, because there are boss fights in this. We'll talk about that in a moment. Overall, the core strategy of Loop Hero comes from this phase here, where you are building out the dungeon and figuring out what it is that your hero is going to be able to handle to try and get through the next loop and eventually fight the boss. If a run is going well, stack up extra enemies, put down some more challenging cards, and try to get as strong as you can to go take down the boss. If it's not going well, maybe you want to avoid putting down anything and everything you can just to get back to the camp at the start of the loop and retreat with your resources so you can work on rebuilding your camp, which is the second big phase. We'll talk about that now. When you do get back to camp with resources that you've gathered over the course of the loop, that's where your meta progression that is part of the roguelite idea comes into play. You have a whole town with different buildings and tech trees that you can progress down to unlock different types of gear, assistant archers who can help you out on the battlefield, extra resources, new cards, and potentially, and most encouragingly, extra classes, which is always a fun time. Being able to get back to camp and work on building out things the way you want them to go is another very important aspect, especially if there is a certain playstyle that you find yourself falling into that you really enjoy. Maybe you really like playing the base warrior class, so you want to get things that are going to give you more HP, allow you to bring more items into battle to boost your stats, things like that. Maybe instead you really like playing the Necromancer, one of the 3 classes that is available, and as such you want things that are going to be able to give you a wider range of equipment that you can use, more shielding, or more chances to resurrect yourself if you fall in battle. Finally, maybe you like playing the Rogue, the third of those aspects, and you want the ability to bring back as many resources as possible, since the Rogue is generally the best at just blatantly slaying out, taking out a bunch of enemies, and gathering resources that you can then bring back to camp to upgrade things further. There's a ton of different paths that you can go here. In true roguelite fashion, you will see a huge boost in your strength and your combat capabilities as you continue to develop the town. Finally, the third aspect of the gameplay here, and what is possibly the single most important overall high-level strategy in Loop Hero, is what cards you're going to have available to you as you build out your deck. Because yes, knowing what to put down where, what equipment to use, what build to lean into as you find different gear in the middle of a run is very important. It is very strategic in the way you go about things. None of that matters if you don't have the right cards in your deck that you can then find during the run. The deck building aspect of Loop Hero is awesome. While there are a lot of different tiles, what makes it interesting is that there are actually interactions between different tiles that cause them to do different things, and this is not stated on the card for you. You are intended to go out and discover things, experiment with things, to figure out what you have available to you. Think Outer Wilds or Tunic. The game's not going to spell everything out for you, it's going to encourage you to learn, and I love that. As it is, there is a maximum and a minimum of each cost of card that you can take in a deck, and generally speaking, like in things like Magic the Gathering, the fewer number of cards that you have in your deck to execute the strategy that you want, the more efficient and capable you will be. But you can go nuts. You can add whatever you want here. Deserts, storm temples, treasuries. Take out things that seem super basic, like mountains if you're playing a Necromancer and you don't care how much HP you have because you have a shield, like an actual magical shield. There's a lot of manipulation that you can do here, and you're going to need to change things on the fly depending on what class you're using and what chapter of the game you are in. What are the chapters? We'll talk about that next. There are 4 chapters in Loop Hero, each of which has a different boss at the end. You start off with the Lich, then you get the Priestess, then the Huntmaster, and finally a little bit of a secret that I will let you discover for yourself. Each of these bosses add some slight variations to the way that the loop is going to work. As you progress, enemies will get more and more skills that they are able to use. Some of these are beneficial for them. Some of them are beneficial for you, such as zombies in later chapters actually getting stunned when you hit them, which makes them far less of a threat than when you are fighting them in earlier chapters. But then they also have a lot of abilities to resurrect themselves and kind of be roadblocks that prevent you from attacking other targets. Each boss itself also has different mechanics associated with it. The Lich has no major in-combat things. We'll talk about how combat works after this section, but he does put down tiles on the board that are going to empower him if you don't block them. Figuring out how to deal with that is very important. The Priestess, on the other hand, is all about in-combat capabilities, as she gets a variety of mirrors that will absorb attacks for her while she wails on you with summoned angels, so being able to break those and punch through to her HP, very important. These are why building out an appropriate deck of cards and having the right class to tackle a challenge are so important, because if you don't, you are going to get crushed before you even know what happened to you. Now, I mentioned combat. Let's talk about that pretty quick. It's not a huge section because there's not a lot to it. This is very much an auto-battler in the way that when you go into combat, your character just does what he does. All of the strategy and all of the gameplay comes prior to entering into combat with any given monster. Again, what tiles have you put down? What items and artifacts did you bring with you from camp to boost your stats? What gear do you have available to you? Are you going for a high attack speed, low damage build? Are you going for a block and counter build? Are you going for a raw tank build with a lot of vampirism to drain HP off of enemies and stall things out? There's plenty of possibilities here, but all of that strategizing comes in before you actually start fighting. Once you're in, and you just gotta hope that you're able to take down whatever monster pile it is that you've thrust yourself into. It is very fun to watch. I do very much enjoy seeing how my battles play out in Loop Hero, but again, it's kind of chill. Like, once you get to that point, you're just seeing how things shake out. And sometimes it can get real stressful when you're desperately hoping you can get that last hit in before the monsters finish you off, and you have the chance to maybe drink some potions or just have some passive health regen kick in to get you back on your feet. Now, what happens if you die in Loop Hero? Well, initially, you're just done, and you can maybe bring some resources with you back to camp. Maybe not, depending on where it is that you're at in the meta progression. As you get further in the game, though, you will unlock the ability to get resurrections, so you can come back a certain number of times with a certain amount of health. There's different ways you can go about this with levels and abilities that you can unlock. And notably, if you have defeated a number of bosses and have their skulls, you can spend those skulls as a resource to retreat to camp and to take all of your resources with you so you can keep making meta progression. Of course, we talk a lot about mechanics here, and I hope that I've gotten the message across that there is a lot of strategy to this that is very different from a lot of the roguelites you might be familiar with. If you're a fan of things like Slay the Spire, there might be a couple of little similarities, but really, Loop Hero is a very unique beast in the way that it blends the type of strategy gaming that I love with the elements of roguelites that I enjoy, because there are a lot of roguelites that I thought I would like more than I did and never quite got around to sinking my teeth into fully. Loop Hero is not the case. I've got 50 out of 50 achievements in this game for a reason. I've cleared pretty much everything. There's a couple secret bosses that I have to do, and I'm still planning on getting it on mobile just so I can have it on me no matter where I go. But that's all just the mechanical stuff. What is the game like on an artistic front? And I mean, you should have been able to see and hear here, it is phenomenal there as well. I love the pixel art style of Loop Hero. It has a very washed out, almost classical feeling to it compared to a lot of the pixel style of other indie games and roguelites. There just is a unique, dark, oppressive atmosphere to the art of Loop Hero while still having a nice color palette, even though it is washed out. I don't really know how to describe it well enough because I'm not an artistic person when it comes to visuals, but it's just incredibly compelling, and you can tell if it's for you just by watching the footage in this video. The soundtrack is also phenomenal. I am obsessed with the soundtrack. It is the only soundtrack that I have ever bought on Steam because it is just that good. And again, you've been hearing it throughout this video. This is a soundtrack that I'm going to be listening to for the rest of my life. I plan on having it on in the background when I'm building Warhammer minis, doing stuff around the apartment. Like, it is just that good, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. The composer of the OST, Blinch, is an absolutely phenomenally talented individual, and I can't wait to see what he does in future games, hopefully with the rest of the Four Quarters team, which of course is the dev team. All told, Loop Hero is phenomenal. It is cheap, it is easy to pick up, there is so much depth to it, so many things to learn, and if you are a strategy gamer like myself, I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. It is such a refreshing change of pace from what we're more used to with your 4X games, your tactics style games, your Fire Emblem grid-based style games, while still scratching that itch in a way that I never expected it to, but that sucked me in so thoroughly. The story itself even is a lot of fun. There's some very interesting concepts in terms of the importance of us remembering our world and us building it the way that we want it to be, the way that we can envision it, and pushing back against the forces of the world to exert our human will on things. And that is a style of story that I adore. It just fires on all cylinders. The whole thing is phenomenal. Please do check it out. Don't be scared by the roguelite aspects of it. Unless that is a genre that you just absolutely despise. There are people like that. Jane is like that, my girlfriend. She totally does not like roguelites, roguelikes. Fair enough, that's fine. But unless that is you, play this game. I guarantee you're going to love it. Again, I have only experienced that sense of you need to learn and make your own progress and discover things through experimentation in games like Outer Wilds and Tunic before this. But damn if Loop Hero doesn't scratch that same itch, and every single time that you find a new combination of cards that makes an interesting terrain effect happen, or you find a new way to make a build that lets you carve through enemies in a way that you didn't expect, or you level up and find a new ability that you can get that completely changes the way you play the game, it's phenomenal. It hits a dopamine drip that very few other games have hit for me. And again, it encouraged me to get 100% achievements on this game, which I've only ever done in one other game before, and that's Unicorn Overlords. That should tell you how much I feel positively about this game. And there's a Necromancer class. Like, I'm rambling at this point, but just this is how much I love this game. Go check out Loop Hero. I highly encourage you to do so, and let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Have you played Loop Hero before? I know a bunch of people around the channel have, but for the newbies, have you played it? Have you seen it? Are you going to check it out after this recommendation on this episode of the Saturday Strategy Spotlight? I've been wanting to make this episode for like a year now. This was going to be my initial episode for the Saturday Strategy Spotlight. I decided to switch it over to Symphony of War, but I needed to highlight this game for you guys because I want more people to play it, and I want Four Quarters to make more stuff like this because it is phenomenal. If there are other games out there like Loop Hero that you would recommend to me, please do so. I am craving more content like this, but until we can talk about that, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Leg Man. Thank you to all of my channel sponsors. You can see them all here on the right side of the screen, both patrons and YouTube members. Plenty more content to come, both for the Saturday Strategy Spotlight and in general across the channel. Some cool things I can't talk about yet, but that I'm very excited to look into, as well as a lot of other indie games that I've been meaning to cover. But that said, I've rambled on long enough. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.